Was Poochie known as a shooter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a hitter for real, for real.
Do I believe that man was a hell yeah. I'll answer that. He definitely was a He looked like it. He acted like it. You kind of felt it when he came in the room. He wasn't a tall man. He wasn't, you know what I mean? Wasn't big, nothing. But to me, he looked like, that wasn't the one to with.
Much like Puffy used Zip, Suge uses a baby mama of his named Teresa Swan, and has her deliver the message and make the solicitation for Poochie to get it Biggie.
The reason Suge Knight was one of the most feared figures in hip-hop wasn't just because of his size or reputation for violence and intimidation. It was mainly because of the kind of people he kept around him. We're talking straight-up killers, and one name that stands out is Wardell Faust, better known as Poochie.
Talking to multiple people, I keep hearing the same name come up.
Is that Poochie?
Poochie.
Right.
Greg Kading said it's Poochie. Mob James said it's Poochie. Whack 100 said it's Poochie.
As Danny Boy once described him, he definitely was a killer. He looked like it. He acted like it when he came in the room. It was something about him. He wasn't a tall man, he wasn't big, nothing like that. To me, he looked like he wasn't the one to with. And he wasn't wrong. In fact, there's long been speculation that Poochie was the one who murdered Biggie, allegedly as retaliation for Tupac's death.
So you're saying that Suge told Poochie to Biggie?
Indirectly.
So just how dangerous was Poochie? Let's find out. Poochie was born in Kentucky back in 1960, but his life took a hard left when his family moved to Compton in 1972. Things went downhill fast. Just 3 years later, at only 14, he allegedly got caught up in some serious crime. The story goes he did a drive-by shooting on a house targeting another kid, and the wild part was his own stepfather was driving the car. Nobody got hurt, but it didn't take long for the law to catch up. His stepdad ended up convicted, and that pretty much marked the beginning of a dark path for young Poochie. By the late 80s, Poochie's name was ringing out in the streets for all the wrong reasons. He was rumored to have killed an Elm Street Pie member named OG Stoney, and this wasn't some low-key setup. Poochie reportedly walked right up to him in broad daylight and shot him in the head, with multiple people watching. It was cold, but that's who Poochie was becoming, someone nobody wanted to mess with. Fast forward to 1991 and things got even darker. He was a suspect in a brutal home invasion, supposedly with a stepbrother. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong, it was straight up murder. The victim, someone they apparently had beef with, was tied up and shot multiple times. They also shot his girlfriend in the head and left her for dead. Miraculously, she survived, but the most chilling part was that 4 kids were inside the house when it all went down. Death row. As time went on, more blood sets started popping up, including the Mob Piru Bloods, the same crew Suge Knight would become associated with. Suge ended up hiring a bunch of Mob Piru members to work at death row, and Poochie was one of them. Some say Suge wasn't actually a member himself, just the boss running the show.
Suge paid people to do certain things. Didn't make him a leader of the Mob Piru. Suge money was an influence for all of those guys and everybody to come in. So without the money, you're nobody. You just Suge Knight. Lived in the hood. Never did nothing.
Either way, guys like Poochie and George G. Williams, aka Ponytail, were part of Suge's personal hit squad. They were given cars and called in whenever Suge needed something handled. Now, unlike most of the other Pyrus hanging around death row, Poochie was a little older and carried himself differently. He wasn't into the party scene or hanging out with rappers. He kept quiet, stayed out of the spotlight, and handled his business like a professional hitman. That low-key vibe meant you won't find many photos of him. And in the few that do exist, he's either rocking sunglasses or turning his head, almost like he knew it was best to stay in the shadows. William Ratcliffe Hull. During the death row era, Poochie was rumored to have carried out a string of deadly hits for Suge Knight. One of the earliest and most talked about was on October 26, 1995. A 33-year-old man named William Ratcliffe Hull, better known as Rat, was shot and killed while standing with a group of men on Central Avenue in Compton. Rat wasn't just some random dude off the street. He had history with Suge. He was part of the Bounty Hunters, a gang that had beef with Suge's mob Pyrus. Rat had been pushing hard to land a deal with Death Row or Interscope, and it led to a few tense, even violent run-ins between him and Suge. One story says Rat and about 10 bounty hunters cornered Suge in a bathroom during a video shoot. An informant later claimed he helped Suge escape. Then there was another incident, a wild brawl between Rat's crew and Suge's people in the valet area of a Marriott near LAX. After all that, word on the street was that Suge had put a target on Rat's head and made it clear his days were numbered. That's when the so-called Hit Squad got involved. George Ponytail Williams, Suge's usual go-to guy, was locked up at the time, so it fell on Poochie to handle things. And just like that, Rat was gone.
William Ratcliffe was run to ground on the streets of Compton and executed. Suge allegedly said in regard to Poochie's actions, "He doesn't around, that's how I want him to do it."
Poochie's name started buzzing even louder after that. He was also suspected of killing another bounty hunter named Smoothie, again allegedly on Suge's orders. At that point, it was clear Poochie was Suge's cleaner, the guy you called when someone needed to disappear. Bruce Richardson. Fast forward 7 months after Rat's murder to May 1996, another name got caught up in the storm, Bruce Richardson. He wasn't just some street guy, he was a known dealer and artist manager in Compton, and word was he knew karate too, which gave him a rep. One night he got into it with a few of Suge's associates outside a club. There are two versions of what went down. Some say Suge stepped in and talked Richardson down, while another version says Richardson actually knocked Suge out cold and maybe even dropped Buntry, one of Suge's key guys. Whether it was over business or a girl, no one really knows for sure. What is known is that not long after the incident, Richardson was shot dead at his own home. The streets started talking again, and according to an informant, Poochie was once more the one who pulled the trigger, allegedly on Suge's orders. All of this builds a chilling picture of Poochie as Suge's personal enforcer, his go-to hitman for dealing with enemies, rivals, or anyone who disrespected the Death Row Empire. Biggie Smalls. Then came one of the biggest murders in hip-hop history, Biggie Smalls. At around 12:30 a.m. on March 9, 1997, Biggie was leaving an after-party thrown by Vibe magazine and Quest Records at the Peterson Automotive Museum. The party had been shut down by the fire department for overcrowding. Biggie and his crew were rolling out in two SUVs. Biggie was the front passenger seat of the second one, while Diddy rode ahead in the lead vehicle. By 12:45, they stopped at a red light on Wilshire Boulevard and South Fairfax Avenue. Diddy's SUV rolled through, but Biggie stopped. That's when a dark Chevy Impala SS pulled up alongside. The driver, described as a black male, pulled out a 9mm handgun and fired multiple rounds. Biggie was hit 4 times and was rushed to Cedars-Sinai, where he was pronounced dead at 1:15 a.m.
Early today, as he left a party in Los Angeles, Wallace, also known as Biggie Smalls, was shot from a passing vehicle. He had been named Rap Artist of the Year at the Billboard Awards in 1995.
From the start, people suspected the murder was connected to Tupac's killing just 6 months earlier. LAPD detective Russell Poole was leading the investigation and eventually came to believe that Suge Knight had orchestrated the hit. According to Poole, Suge allegedly used corrupt LAPD officer David Mack and Mack's associate Amir Muhammad to pull it off. Muhammad, who wasn't officially listed as a suspect at the time, later came forward to clear his name. Poole presented his findings to LAPD Chief Bernard Parks, but instead of pushing further, Parks told him to drop it. Frustrated by how the department was handling things, Poole ended up resigning in 1999.
There was a guy, a guy with a bow tie, Amir Muhammad, I think, who has come forward and said, I have nothing to do with this. Russell Poole?
Russell Poole had so many problems, like he retires a year before, he quits basically a year before retirement. And he's just, this whole thing is, why won't they listen to me?
Eventually, in 2006, the Biggie case was reopened, and this time, it was led by LAPD detective Greg Kading, who's since retired. According to Kading, a major break came from one of Suge Knight's former girlfriends who used the alias Teresa Swan. She ended up spilling a lot of tea. Apparently, Suge's lawyer had written a slick letter to the LA County Sheriff's Department that made it look like Teresa was part of Suge's legal team. That move gave her access to Suge in a private attorney-client area where no one could monitor their conversations. During one of those secret jail visits, Suge allegedly told Teresa he wanted Biggie taken out. and that he'd make sure whoever did it got paid.
Suge uses a baby mama of his named Teresa Swan and has her deliver the message and make the solicitation for Poochie to get at Biggie.
Teresa followed through and arranged a couple of low-key meetings with Poochie at a Denny's in Lakewood. Poochie, always about business, wanted to know how and when he was getting paid. Teresa told him not to worry, once the job was done, the money would come. There was also the matter of the car. Suge had bought himself a 1995 Chevy Impala, and he also bought one for Poochie. It wasn't just a generous gift, most likely it was part of the deal for handling Biggie. That Impala, by the way, matched the kind of car used in the drive-by shooting.
When Suge Knight had bought his 1995 Chevy Impala, he had also purchased a Chevy Impala for Poochie.
Kading's team later found more pieces of the puzzle. One big clue came in the form of prison letters written in 2004 by a Bloods member named Roderick Reed. He'd been corresponding with a sketchy FBI informant named Kevin Hahn. In those letters, Reed claimed that Poochie was the guy who killed Biggie. Reed had ties to Suge's inner circle. His co-defendant in a separate case was George Williams, so his words carried weight. Beyond the Biggie murder, there were always whispers about Poochie's past. Some people believed he had personal beef with Bad Boy because of what happened to Big Jake Robles, Suge's close associate who got killed in Atlanta back in '95. That murder was rumored to have been done by Anthony Wolf Jones, a guy connected to Bad Boy. If that's true, it could have added more fuel to the fire when it came to Biggie. Then in 2000, 3 years after Biggie was killed, Poochie was caught in another ambush. He and his boy Chin Walker were sitting in a van on a dead-end street in Compton when two gunmen ran up and opened fire. Chin died on the spot, but Poochie somehow survived, though he was badly hurt and ended up in a wheelchair for a while. Like a lot of cases from that era, Chin's murder was never solved. There was even a dark little story floating around from 1999 about Poochie and Chin riding around when Puffy's tribute to Biggie, "I'll Be Missing You," came on the radio. Instead of changing the station, they supposedly laughed it off. One of Chin's boys even joked that he should have gotten royalties off the track. As always, the cycle of violence kept spinning. Rumor had it that a guy named Snake was behind the ambush on Poochie and Chin. But not long after, Snake turned up dead. Most people figured Poochie had gotten his revenge, although no one was ever officially charged. The Killing of Poochie. Poochie's own end came on July 24, 2003. He was riding his motorcycle through Compton when someone lit him up, 10 shots to the back. Like so many killings in that world, his murder was never officially solved, but the word on the street was that it was someone close, maybe even another former death row ally who had flipped on him. And that was the world Poochie lived in. One where loyalty didn't last, enemies could be friends yesterday, and death was always one wrong move away. Now, as mentioned earlier, Suge didn't just have one guy like Poochie, he had a whole hit squad, and they were just as ruthless, just as deadly. Heron Palmer. An example is Heron Palmer. Standing at 5'9" and athletically built, Heron was always a ladies' man, known for stealing other guys' girls and beating up the guys afterward. In late 1978, he went to prison for armed robbery, and by the time he got out, he was even more jacked. Heron was already causing trouble on the streets before the Crip and Blood gangbanging fully took off. He was a loud talker who could back up everything he said, earning a reputation as a wild and crazy dude in Compton. When he wasn't in and out of jail, Heron was robbing and selling drugs to make money. He didn't mind getting his hands dirty. By the late 80s, he was a beast in Compton, someone who wouldn't hesitate to knock you out or pull the trigger. He's alleged to have committed multiple murders during this time. His rage found a new direction when he got involved with Suge and Death Row.
I ain't never had a job before in my life until I started working for Suge. You know, in and out of jail, you know what I'm saying? Did a little bit of everything.
Suge Knight's Death Row Records allegedly got its start with $1.5 million in money, a hefty chunk of which came from cocaine kingpin Michael Harris and his wife Lydia. What began with that investment turned into a juggernaut in the music industry, raking in hundreds of millions with a roster that boasted names like Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Tupac, and even for a brief but surprising stint, MC Hammer. Heron Palmer was a crucial player during Death Row's heyday. Officially, he was on the security detail, but anyone in the know understood that was just a front. Heron was part of the muscle behind Death Row. He wasn't just a bodyguard, he was a hitman, a stone-cold enforcer. He liked to call himself Mr. 17, claiming he had 17 bodies to his name. His preferred method was ambushing his targets and unloading on their cars while they were still inside. Heron's violent streak was legendary. For example, there was an incident where he got into a car-to-car shootout with some Crips on Launch Boulevard. Heron's barrage of bullets left the Crips' car riddled with holes, causing it to crash into a pole. Only one person survived that carnage. But there was another side to Heron. To his family and friends, he was fiercely loyal and always looked out for his people. He was loved by his set and his crew at death row. Heron officially hailed from the Looters Park Piru, but he was so tight with the mob Piru that both sets claimed him. Working at death row exposed him to all sorts of people in the industry. He even dated Left Eye from TLC for a while and lent his voice to some projects, like doing a voiceover for Snoop Dogg's Murder Was the Case and a skit of Lady of Rage's album. Heron was especially close to Tupac. There was this one time when Tupac and Heron went to a store and some Crips started tasseling Tupac, asking him where he was from. Tupac, ever the fighter, stood his ground and repped Mob Piru. Heron then walked out of the store, and the sight of him was enough to send the Crips running. Tupac respected Heron a lot and even mentioned him in a few songs, most notably in To Live and Die in LA, where he gave shoutouts to his close crew. Heron was there with Tupac during the infamous altercation with Orlando Anderson at the MGM Grand Casino. When Tupac punched Orlando, Heron jumped in to help with a beatdown, but Tupac attacking Orlando, aka Baby Lane, was a huge mistake. Orlando was a known hitter for the Southside Compton Crips and was under investigation for several murders at the time, including those of Damon Long and Elber Webb Jr. It wasn't shocking that Baby Lane retaliated that same night. Tupac was shot 4 times, and while everyone else partied at Club 662, Heron was the only one who went to the hospital and stayed with Tupac. When Tupac died 6 days later, Heron took it really hard and was dead set on getting revenge. After Tupac's death, Heron got close with Napoleon, another death row affiliate. Heron showed Napoleon around the gritty parts of Compton and the surrounding areas. Napoleon, fascinated by the streets, soaked up all the stories and lessons Heron had to share. Heron had strong ties in Inglewood too. One day, Risky, the artist behind the album covers for Tupac and the Outlaws, called Heron in a panic. He was in trouble with some Crips. Heron and Napoleon sped over from the valley, hopped out of their car with guns drawn, and confronted the Crips. The moment the Crips saw Heron, they backed off immediately, not wanting any problems with him. In Heron's final days, things at Death Row Records were far from stable. Rumor had it that Suge Knight wasn't paying him, but Heron stayed loyal regardless. The whole Death Row crew started turning on each other. Heron and George E. Williams, both Death Row associates and from the same gang, eventually had a falling out. This all came to a head on June 1st, 1997. That Sunday, there was a Death Row and Piru picnic at Gonzales Park in Compton. Leading up to this, George Williams had been spreading rumors that Heron had shot him and tried to kill him. Heron was at the park just playing football when he got a page and decided to leave. A witness saw Poochie, Roderick, George, and his girlfriend Woozy, who was dressed as a man that day, follow Heron as he left the park. Heron was stopped at a red light, stuck in traffic, when Woozy and Roderick jumped out at the main intersection, armed with automatic weapons. They opened fire, hitting Heron 13 times. He died right there at the scene. This brazen attack happened in broad daylight in front of numerous witnesses, including a fire department truck that was 2 cars behind. Only Roderick was convicted of Heron's murder, but many believe that Woozy, George's girlfriend, was the one who fired the fatal shots. Heron left behind his children and family. Fast forward to January 19, 2014. Heron's son Christopher was on his way home from high school track practice when he got caught in the middle of a shootout between 2 warring Mexican gangs. A stray bullet struck Christopher in the head. When police arrived, they found him lying in the grass in front of a residence. He was put on life support for 3 days before they pulled the plug. Christopher was just 17 years old. At the end of the day, pretty much all of Suge Knight's hit squad is gone, and Suge himself is wasting away in prison.